Hi everyone, Christian here. In this video I wanted to give a brief overview of the user interface layout of Everest. So let's start at the top of the screen. At the top of the screen you're going to see a bunch of icons. Some of these icons are what I call global controls. They control all the loops together at one time for each press. These are things like erase all and multi-mute. There's also icons here for the help menu and the settings menu. And when Everest is hosted or is hosting other apps, you'll also see an icon for the associated app. Below that, in the main area, are the 4 loop tracks. Each track have the same exact set of controls. On the left-hand side is the button matrix. This is where you can trigger the different loop functions like record, play, overdub, and undo. There are even more functions you can perform here, and we'll get to those in later tutorials. In the middle is the waveform window. This has things like loop length and the actual waveform of the loop that's playing, and it's touch enabled, so you can control the start and the end point of the loop at will. It also shows the undo history. On the right-hand side is the fader. At this point, it just controls the global output, but in the future, it should have multifunction mode as well, or other capabilities. The 4 loops are stacked on top of each other, but at the bottom there's a little empty gap, and that is where the master loop or the beat display appears. And this is helping to visualize the synchronization happening between the 4 loops, and that'll be in its own tutorial. So let's take a look at probably the most important menu, which is the help menu. In this menu, I basically have a description of the buttons and the details of what they do and how they interact with each other. So if there's some behavior that's not what you're expecting, or you're just really curious about what it does, feel free to take a look in here. As we scroll down, you'll see that all the buttons are represented both for each individual loop track, and as we get to the bottom, you'll see we also have controls for and descriptions for the global controls. And this also details the behavior with hosted apps. Under the settings menu, which is the gear icon, there's a lot of other options. Starting off, there's things like background audio and global quantization state. There's also a mixer, which has basically rudimentary controls that don't really have room on the main screen. This includes quadraphonic panning, so if you have 4 outputs, you can pan each loop to individual outputs. It has the feedback control for each loop. This is the regeneration rate. This is similar to maybe a tape delay or something. Then at the bottom, there's the hardware input channel assignment, where you could assign, if you had multiple inputs of a hardware device, you could assign the different inputs to different loops. This allows each loop to receive completely different audio. Going back out, below that is the save and copy menu. So this allows you to save a playing loop or copy a playing loop. When you copy a playing loop, it copies it to the device's pasteboard, and that can be pasted in other apps like iMessage and GarageBand. When you save a file, you can save it back to your desktop computer by connecting to iTunes. Under the MIDI setting menu is the controls for channel and also Bluetooth control, and also built-in documentation. This documentation details both how Everest responds to MIDI notes, control changes, and some interesting features that I added to try to help you control Everest with smaller MIDI controllers. There's an implementation chart and a mapping table as well, detailing the different controls. Going back out, below that is the inter-app audio section. This will require its own tutorial as it can get pretty sophisticated, so that'll come later. And then finally at the bottom is a little feature I added, hopefully to help people who need to use the internal microphone and the speakers. Normally there's feedback involved, but this uses, on startup only, this uses the built-in voice processing of the device to help reduce feedback. I generally don't use it because it manipulates the sound a little too much for my taste, but it might help you. The last feature I wanted to show you is what happens when you reorient your device. You change it from landscape to portrait mode, or vice versa. The user interface will adapt and change the proportions of the waveform windows and the button matrices. And this will work on both iPhones, iPads, and iPod Touches. You may, on smaller devices, notice that some buttons disappear and reappear, but all the buttons are available. You just may have to reorient the device to see the buttons that are missing. This does not happen on the iPad because there's enough screen real estate to display all the buttons.